I'm Nima Rajan. Defense Minister Anita Anand says for far too long, the government failed to dedicate enough time, money, personnel, and effort to deal with sexual harassment and sexual assault within the military.
For far too long, your government failed to dedicate enough time, money, personnel, and effort to deal with sexual harassment, sexual assault, and discrimination based on sex, gender, gender identity, and sexual orientation in the military and the department. Countless lives have been harmed because of inaction and systemic failure.
Well, as you heard, she issued a formal apology this afternoon to victims of military sexual misconduct, saying things can, must, and will change. Chief of the Defense Staff, General Wayne Eyre, and Defense Department Deputy Minister Jody Thomas also offered apologies on behalf of their institutions. This as part of the government's $600 million settlement agreement in relation to several class action lawsuits. Meanwhile, the federal government has instructed the Bank of Canada to keep the annual inflation rate between 1% and 3%. The renewed 5-year inflation targeting agreement also outlines that the bank should consider how close employment levels are to the highest mark they can hit before fueling inflationary problems. That could mean the Bank of Canada will keep its trend-setting interest rate at the lowest level possible for longer stretches. This to help the economy recover from a downturn. Turning to Ontario now, where the leading physician says Omicron will likely become dominant within weeks. The development comes after weeks of a steadily rising disease curve, with over 1,470 cases reported on Sunday. The 7-day average is 1,236 daily infections, which is up from 920 just a week ago. Experts are calling on the province to explain how it plans to shift its pandemic response. A University of Toronto epidemiologist says Omicron is hitting at the worst possible time. This comes as health workers contend with burnout and pandemic-wary residents gear up for holiday gatherings. Well, speaking of gatherings, a good number of Canadians who know a family member or friend who isn't vaccinated against COVID-19 have given up trying to convince them to get their shots. A new Leger poll finds only about 1 in 8 of 1,500 people surveyed get into an argument over the person's vaccination status. Quebecers were most likely to try to convince others to get shots, while people in prairie provinces were most inclined to drop the subject. New Brunswick has joined 8 other provinces in signing on to the federal government's $10 a day childcare plan. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement this morning in a joint news conference with Premier Blaine Higgs. Mr. Trudeau says the federal government program will grow the economy. This by letting more women re-enter the workforce while giving children the best possible schooling. Ontario's online portal for booking COVID-19 vaccines experienced some technical issues Monday morning. This as residents 50 and older become eligible for a third dose, provided their second one was just 6 months ago. It comes as Federal Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam tabled her annual report. In it, she says Canada was not prepared to face a public health emergency of the magnitude of COVID-19. Dr. Tam is using her report to urge the federal government to make fundamental changes. This so the country is better equipped to handle present and future health threats. The Quebec government shut down 4,000 of its websites over the weekend. This as a preventative measure following threats of a cyber attack. The province's Minister of Digital Transformation made the announcement on Sunday in Quebec City. The move comes amid warnings about a software vulnerability in a Java-based library of an Apache product. The Quebec government has been working to identify which websites are at risk one by one before putting them back online. The Canadian press has learned the federal government has planted only 0.4% of the 2 billion trees it pledged to put in the ground across Canada by 2030. Figures obtained through an Access to Information request show 8.5 million trees have been planted as of mid-November. The government has said the 2 billion trees would help Canada meet its climate change targets while creating roughly 4,300 new jobs. Natural Resources Canada insists it is on track to meet its target. And the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have won the 108th Grey Cup. The Blue Bombers beat the Hamilton Tiger Cats 33-25 in overtime. The win at Tim Hortons Field makes the Blue Bombers repeat Grey Cup champions. We'll be back with a look at stories from around the world, but first we dive into trade tensions with the U.S. and Canada. That and more coming up next. Ottawa is raising the stakes in an ongoing electric vehicle feud with Washington. Canada is threatening retaliatory tariffs if Congress approves a controversial incentive for American-made electric vehicles. A letter from Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and Trade Minister Mary Ng also warns of a reversal of certain dairy-related trade concessions. They say the U.S. proposal amounts to a 34% tariff on electric vehicles assembled in Canada. They also say it violates the terms of the new NAFTA agreement. In a workaround pitch, the Prime Minister says Canada can align its EV incentives with the U.S. if Canadian-made vehicles are made eligible for proposed U.S. tax credits. Well, with us to discuss this further is consultant and former International Trade Minister, Mr. Stockwell Day. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Great to be with you.
Now, we mentioned a lot of controversial points and tension points around this EV dispute between the U.S. and Canada. Can you give us a quick overview of the situation?
Well, sure. And listen, we want to I think we need to congratulate the federal Liberals for pushing hard on this. And they need to also realize, though, this is a very big election item also for the Biden administration coming up to their midterms. So they are not going to back off, in my view. I appreciate the pressure we're putting on them. I don't know that that's going to work. I think the Prime Minister talking about equalizing the subsidy on the Canadian side is probably going to be more effective. And where it's going to put the pressure, ultimately, I believe, is going to be on Premier Ford. Because as you know, you've got the provincial Liberals with an election coming up in June in Ontario saying they'll put up about an $8,000 rebate. Got the Prime Minister saying they might put one up. We know that rebates work in terms of getting people to buy. And the big thing, another major area for Premier Ford is it's a huge job issue related to mining in Ontario for the much needed minerals that power these electric cars. So I think the person who's going to be ultimately under the most pressure is going to be Premier Ford. I believe with these other forces aligning, you are going to see some movement ahead on the rebates, probably going to actually in the long run preserve jobs in Ontario.
And in terms of international relations, we know Mary Ng and Chrystia Freeland are saying this violates the NAFTA agreement. But how does this affect the USMCA trade agreement?
Well, that's going to be a key focus. And I applaud both those ministers for stepping up. They're taking a tough approach. But the thing we have to keep in mind, and we used to deal with this on softwood lumber issues with the U.S. and so many other areas, even when we would win them in court, for instance, on the softwood lumber, the U.S. would say, yeah, okay, you won in court, but, you know, we've got our own issues, so we're going ahead. So that's what, unfortunately, we're up against, is this electoral imperative coming out of the U.S. The Democrats are not going to allow anything to happen to cause any job loss. So it's good for our ministers to raise these, show where the gaps are lying in the agreement. But in the end of the day, I think we're going to have to see the subsidies coming on our side to get any movement to preserve these jobs as these cars are being manufactured.
All right, Mr. Day. Well, while Canada and the U.S. are not seeing eye to eye over this electric vehicle dispute, they are united in a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympic Games. So what have been the recent updates to this boycott and the reactions to it so far?
Well, these are really heart-tearing decisions, and I've seen a lot of these over the years. I can remember in 1980 when Canada made a decision to boycott the Moscow Games along with most of the free world at the time. But you know, there's some real downsides to that. I'm all for governments deciding they are on a diplomatic or political level going to boycott games, but I always say leave the athletes out of it. I can remember, and some of your viewers would, Diane Jones-Konachowski, our female pentathlon, one of the strongest women in the world at the time, and her heartbreak. And I know her personally when she, after training her whole life for this, couldn't go to Moscow. And, you know, the irony of that was about 2 weeks later, there was a world track and field event. She competed. the winners, the Soviets were all there who had won at the Moscow Games. She beat them all. She would have won gold if she'd gone to the Olympics. And I say, if you go back and you think about, Nima, 1936 Olympics in Berlin, called the Nazi Games because Hitler was saying no blacks, no Jews should be invited to those games. Huge pressure to boycott, not let any athletes go. So France boycotted and Spain boycotted. But I think we're all glad the U.S. decided not to boycott. Jesse Owens went to those games for the U.S. He absolutely shattered records, won 4 golds, and also shattered this myth that Hitler was trying to promote about master race, white supremacy. And if they had boycotted, if they had not let the athletes go, that wouldn't have happened. So I'm for governments deciding to veto, but let the athletes go. They've trained all their lives for these things.
All right, sir. Thank you. We'll be right back. A new report by Equifax finds more Canadians are starting their own businesses coming into the new year. This is following a serious hit to small businesses in North America during the pandemic. Equifax Canada's Q3 Small Business Credit Trends report claims there is a small business revival happening as tens of thousands of new businesses are emerging in Canada and becoming financially active. This is further stoked by activity in Alberta and Atlantic Canada. Well, joining us now to tell us more on the current and future state of the small business economy in Canada is Mr. Jeff Brown, small and medium business leader at Equifax Canada. Mr. Brown, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, looking over your report, I came across the term financially active quite a bit. So let's start by clarifying what exactly is a financially active business.
Well, calling a business financially active is such an important indicator, especially during the days of the pandemic. And when we use the term financially active, it means not only has a business gone through the process of registering provincially or federally, it means it's actually purchased goods and services from a major supplier or a bank. Essentially, it's made a commitment of funds somewhere to another business and is actively contributing to the growth of the economy, regardless of its size. So if you're a small plumbing business, this would mean purchasing fittings and equipment from an original parts manufacturer. If you're a restaurant, it means purchasing goods, products from equipment and Canada's major food distributors across Canada.
All right, sir. And taking a look at the report overall, what would you say are the key takeaways from it?
So I think there's really 3 key points. So number 1 is that the federal small business support really gave small businesses a lifeline. So despite lockdowns ending and easing of restrictions, the amount of new credit being requested by small businesses remained fairly low. We saw this through a 20% year-over-year increase or decrease in credit requested by small business suppliers, and only a 30% year-over-year increase to credit being established with the banks. So given that this is a comparison to last year's full lockdown period, it's strikingly low. So with the reduction of small business support programs back on October 23rd, it means an incoming resurgence for banks and suppliers, the amount of credit that's going to be requested. So fairly key point there. Number 2 would be small business delinquencies continue to hit record lows. So this means that credit from small businesses has been establishing during the pandemic has been meeting the expectations of lenders and suppliers. So Canada-wide, 30-plus day delinquencies were down about 4%. So this is from 12 to 8% since the pandemic really started. So that's a really key point. So small businesses are really doing well and have been supported very strongly by the federal government. So the last one is really kind of what we said on the onset, is that small businesses are really going through a revival. So we've seen tens of thousands of new small businesses emerge and become financially active within the economy. So while the numbers of new financially active businesses isn't quite as high as prior to the pandemic, it's leaps and bounds higher than it was this time last year. So Alberta is really leading the charge of new business growth with 72% increase. And Atlantic Canada is in around 62%. So really a strong play across the board here. So while it's been incredibly easy to focus on the negative stories that have happened during the pandemic, the volume of new small businesses transacting in the market right now is a sign of proper support being given by a combination of us as consumers and really the government. So it's really ignited the entrepreneur spirit within Canada right now, and they're ready to really seize the opportunity that lies ahead.
And this report mentioned that growth is being stoked by Alberta and Atlantic Canada specifically. So why those regions?
So both these markets were hit really hard at the beginning of the pandemic and saw the brunt of delinquencies. and a reduced number of consumers really spending. So basically, they were the first to see the largest hit. And so it shouldn't really be a surprise to us that they're also the first markets that really want to be through this at the end of the day. So we've seen really key growth in the construction industry as well as the services industry. So as these lockdowns really eased, it was those same markets that really wanted to go in there. So we're being stoked by a really hot real estate market, and the services industry is really being taken over by businesses that really want to be in there. So there's a lot of businesses that were self-selecting, and a lot of new entrepreneurs really want to step in and fill that void.
All right, sir. So what do these numbers indicate for the future of Canada's economy heading into the new year?
So really, there's a lot of positive things that are really going on. So delinquencies being low, really what's going to be happening here is the federal government's going to be looking at the CEBA loans, the Canadian Emergency Business Account. So as those loans get paid off on this interest-free government-backed loans, as those get paid back, if it's being paid very well, we're going to see kind of a reopening of the economy even more so than we're seeing now. It's going to really help us get through some of the labor shortages that are happening and really be a positive note. So we'll see Canada's banks really being able to provide more loans out to small businesses because there's going to be more demand. And we'll see suppliers being able to transact more with them as well because there's going to be a freeing of capital that happens.
All right, some good news to keep our eyes out for, sir. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back after the break with a look at stories from around the world as a deadly tornado rips through the U.S. Those 18 plus in the U.K. will be offered a COVID-19 booster by the end of the month, and the EU avoids joining the diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics. These stories and more news from around the world coming up after the break, so stay tuned. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. The governor of Kentucky says there are now at least 64 people confirmed dead following Friday's tornadoes. Authorities are still trying to determine the total number of dead. The swarm of twisters leveled entire communities and also killed at least 14 people in Illinois, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Missouri. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says everyone 18 and up will be offered a COVID-19 booster shot by the end of the month. This to protect against what he called an anticipated tidal wave of Omicron. Long lines were reported outside vaccination centers across England this morning. Health officials report Omicron cases are doubling every 2 to 3 days. And they predict it will replace Delta as the dominant strain in the UK within days. Well, turning to China, which was quick to dismiss the decision by Canada and the UK to join Washington's diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics as a farce, and it was not expecting a worldwide following. And it may have been correct. Several European Union nations have made it clear that they have little appetite to join the American initiative. The diplomatic boycott was designed to protest China's human rights record. Meanwhile, a Hong Kong court has sentenced activist and business tycoon Jimmy Lai to 13 months in jail. This for urging participation in last year's banned Tiananmen vigil. On Monday, the Hong Kong District Court convicted 7 others on similar charges. Hong Kong's government has banned the candlelight vigil for the past 2 years on pandemic control grounds. However, it is widely believed that the ban is intended to be permanent as authorities look to suppress the city's pro-democracy movement. Turning to Afghanistan, where a top Taliban leader says the country's new rulers are committed in principle to education and jobs for girls and women. The Taliban's foreign minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, spoke to the Associated Press in a rare interview on Sunday. In it, he said that the Taliban appeals to the world's mercy and compassion to help the millions of Afghans in desperate need. He acknowledged the world's dismay at limitations on girls' education and on women in the workforce and said the Taliban are working to improve the situation. Israel's prime minister has met with the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. This is part of the first official visit to the United Arab Emirates by an Israeli leader since the establishment of official relations between the two countries last year. Naftali Bennett's visit to the Gulf Arab Federation comes against the backdrop of nuclear talks between world powers and regional arch-rival Iran over its nuclear program. Australia and South Korea have signed a $720 million defense deal. It will see South Korean defense company Hanwha provide Australia with artillery weapons, supply vehicles, and radars. It is the largest defense contract struck between Australia and an Asian nation, and it comes at a time of heightened tensions between Australia and China. The West African nation of Ghana says it will fine airlines $3,500 for each passenger who arrives without being fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Aviation officials also say the same penalty will apply to airlines for each passenger permitted to board a flight without completing a health declaration form. It comes as Ghana also requires all travelers over the age of 18 to be fully vaccinated. Health officials say the measure is necessary to curb the spread of COVID-19 ahead of the busy holiday travel period. Elon Musk is the person of the year, according to Time magazine, calling him a clown, genius, edgelord, visionary, industrialist, showman. Time magazine has named Tesla founder and CEO Elon Musk as its person of the year for 2021. The founder and CEO of SpaceX is also estimated to be the richest person in the world, with a net worth of $300 billion. And Miss India is the new Miss Universe. Harnaz Sandhu of India was crowned the winner on Sunday, topping a field of some 80 contestants in a pageant that was touched by politics and the pandemic. The ceremony was held in the Israeli Red Sea resort town of Eilat, and it drew attention in recent weeks to a grassroots Palestinian-led boycott that urged contestants to skip the event to protest Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. Only Malaysia did not send a contestant. Brad Bartko says he's on a mission to make Edmonton more accessible, one bar at a time. The 28-year-old has cerebral palsy and has been using a wheelchair his whole life, which is why he started a consulting business to make bars more welcoming. It's called Disability Accessible by Design. He also educates staff on how to serve people with a disability. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on the Forum Daily News.